Welcome to our continuing interviews with Venable Legends. Today we're gathered together with Geoff Garinther, who has only recently retired, but we still haven't celebrated that retirement yet. So he's in this wonderful place. Geoff has been with the firm or has more than 35 years of experience in courtrooms and boardrooms around the country. He's helped clients resolve some of their thorniest legal issues. A former federal prosecutor. In fact, he was a federal prosecutor while I was a law clerk. I would ask for permission to follow him around the courthouse to see him apply his craft. And he was chair of our national litigation practice for many, many years. He's represented boards and individual directors, lawyers and law firms, doctors and lobbyists, and others in their dealings with the U.S. Department of Justice. He's been a tremendous leader at the firm in every way imaginable, and I'm really grateful that he's agreed to take a little bit of time to sit down and chat with me today. Geoff, welcome.
I'm grateful for your asking. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I'm asking everybody this question to start it off, because I think we all have this Genesis story. But what was it that made you want to be a lawyer?
I think mine is a little different. I grew up in a small town about 45 minutes from here, Havre de Grace, fewer than 10,000 people. There was one lawyer who lived in town, a guy named Freeborn Brown. He gave off Atticus Finch, Gregory Peck vibes because he was always wearing a three-piece suit. And back in those days, lawyers worked 6 days a week, so every Saturday. On Sundays, he lectured in church. He emceed every event. He could talk to anybody about anything. So it looked attractive, but I didn't think that that possibility existed in the real world. He seemed to be on a whole different plane of the universe. And what I really wanted to do was be a reporter. I'd been a teenager in high school in the years after Watergate. Watergate graduated in '77, was the sports editor of my high school paper, had worked for a couple former Post reporters who bought and published the paper in my hometown. Went to college, was the editor-in-chief of our newspaper there. And my college advisor said, look, everybody wants to be a newspaper reporter like you do. You got to get some kind of leg up. Why don't you think about law school or something like that? And I started thinking about it in my junior year. But even when I got to Venable after my first year, I interviewed with Grace Cunningham, Ben Rosenberg, maybe Bob Waldman, Ron Taylor, Stuart Webb, for all I know. I don't remember it well, but got here for the summer of 1982. And even after my first year, I was still thinking I wanted to be a reporter. Spent the summer here, and I've talked about this in different settings. What I liked about it was that it was a lot like being a reporter. You had to take a lot of information and distill it into something understandable. But you were much more likely here to be working in teams. And just everything about the place was inviting and welcoming. And I just had a great summer. So my second summer, I did the most different thing I could think of. I went to the West Coast, worked in San Diego for the district attorney, developed a love for criminal law, but I knew I was coming back to Venable, and after clerking, I did. So that's my origin story, a little roundabout getting to the law.
So how did your legal career evolve from that point?
Well, I was here for 3 years, 85 to 88. Had always wanted to be a prosecutor for a while, left in 88 to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Warren Hamill followed not long after that. I stayed till 93 and came back to Venable. And I think the evolution, as I think of it, was in two halves. The first 20 years of my career, I just fell in love with trials. And I had been the director of our talent show in high school, our senior year. I didn't have any talent, but I was organized and I could spot talent. And it's a little bit what a trial is like. You're directing a play and everybody's got their roles and you've got to know where you need to be and who your audience is. And I just loved it. And in the 5 years I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, I had about 24 trials. So that was great. And then I came back here, and at least from 1993 till about 2006 is when I became division chair. There were a surprising number of trials and continuing that. And the U.S. Attorney's Office was different, of course, because there's not really a hierarchy. You've got a U.S. Attorney and then a bunch of assistants who, like the law clerks did, we would go to each other's courtrooms to watch each other try cases. I watched Warren watched me. And that was a great thing. Here, it's different, but you still had teams, and you had people back in the office who knew what was going on in the courtroom. You had other people in the courtroom. I love that aspect of it, and it sort of confirmed that I'd made the right decision instead of being a solitary writer, maybe writing a little fiction on the side at night, being a part of something where you really felt useful. So it was fun.
You went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and then for whom did you clerk? You mentioned your clerkship.
Sure. I clerked for Judge Marvin Smith, who I think my co-clerk and I were his last set of clerks in 1984, 1985. At the time, he'd written more opinions than any other judge, passed away maybe 10 years ago. Kind of a crotchety guy by the time we worked for him, and we had chosen to live in Annapolis where the court was. He lived in Denton. Bill, my co-clerk, and I would drive over to Denton every morning when the court sat, pick the judge up, and talk about the cases on the way in. Then, of course, we had to drive him back at the end of the day and return to Annapolis. That was our penance for choosing not to live in Denton. And when we were in Denton, we would have lunch with him every day until we realized we could go to Bill's mother's house where he'd grown up. And she had a much better lunch than a restaurant, and we got a little non-Judge Smith time. So it was really interesting and good year. Although I would say to young lawyers, the best clerkship to have for a job here at Venable is the one that you did in the federal courthouse down the street. And we're very fortunate to have a lot of former federal clerks here, from Sally Bryan all the way to the 3 recent Judge Bennett clerks we've had and everybody else.
And for the benefit of those who may be seeing this, I clerked for a federal district court judge. And so it's a trial level opportunity in the federal system and gives you just tremendous exposure. So it was certainly a good experience.
How to do it and how not to do it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Do you have a favorite matter on which you worked over the course of your career?
So there are 3 buckets of things that I work on. One is commercial litigation, and that's obviously most of what we do in the litigation division. Most of what I do is in the 2 other buckets, though. One is investigations. And Ben Civiletti brought us a lot of really interesting investigations when he came back from DOJ in the 1980s, active in the 80s, the 90s, up through about 2012 when he retired. And there was an advantage to not representing a lot of the Fortune 500 in that we were independent, and we were brought in often to do independent investigations of companies. And there's a particular kind called Zapata investigations that we did a lot of, where there's a shareholder suit. You do the investigation. If there really is a claim, you can step into the shoes of the plaintiff's lawyers. You settle with them, get those lawyers out of the case, you take over. This is what Dan Moylan and I spent about 10 years doing for a client, WellCare, from 2009 to probably 2019 or so. So there are those investigations. And then the third bucket for me, and the thing that I don't know if I like it the most, but it's the most memorable, is when you're defending somebody whose liberty is at stake. And that's almost always a guy. And it's because it's a guy, it's almost always not a big team defending him, but you and another lawyer. And there's nothing that's as all engrossing as having someone's liberty at stake. And if you're lucky enough to get an acquittal, and I've got 5 or 6 guys who've been through this, they're incredibly grateful. And you might exchange a note on a birthday or an anniversary of the acquittal. But they also don't want to spend too much time being reminded of it. It's the hardest thing that just about any of us would ever go through, and they're happy to be able to move on after that. But it's a very rewarding part of the practice. So I've always liked that best of what we do here.
Sort of Atticus Finch.
Well, isn't that the standard for all of us that we'd like to? Yeah,
absolutely.
We do. I've teased him often publicly, but I do think Warren really is the modern day, maybe not the 3-piece suits, but he's a guy you want to go to when you need the right answer. What's the right thing to do here?
Well, you're nice to deflect. You are that guy as well. So what a career.
Thank you.
How has the profession changed over the course of your time practicing?
For all the differences, and it's really different, you've seen the scope of that, to me, the next 10, and they've been exponential in some ways, speeding up as we've gone over the decades. I think the next 10 years are going to outstrip the last 40 years in terms of change. And I think a lot of it's going to be AI, and I think some of it is going to be climate change. I'm not sure how that manifests as legal issues, but I think that's to be expected. And I think every lawyer is going to have to be a prompt engineer and figure out how to stay ahead of AI. Jeff Kurzweil has a distant cousin, a really interesting guy, Ray Kurzweil, who's written a lot about this in the coming singularity and how within 10 years our brains will be attached to the cloud. I don't know when all that becomes true, but it all does seem likely. And to me, I just think it sounds like it'll be transformative. And I think the key thing for young lawyers is going to be to learn as much as they can about it, not be afraid of it in any way. And there always is that aspect of things. I remember we had a great librarian who eventually left us because he just didn't want to adapt to the electronic way. And it was understandable at the time, but embracing it is the way to deal with it.
What about your professional life as you have this opportunity now to sort of reflect upon it, look back on it, makes you most proud?
It'll sound like I'm being paid by Venable, but it is honestly what we have built here on the shoulders of others and accounting for all the great work people you and I never met who built this place starting in 1900. And for the benefit of others, because the thing that hits you as you get older, it's a little bit like that nostalgia of being a grandparent. There were lots of diapers to change and getting thrown up on, and somebody's still doing that, but you don't have to deal with it. And as I look back on it, it is what we've built, which is a very different kind of law firm. No international offices. At least when we go to retreats, we pretty much know all of our partners because of the frequency of those retreats and the extent to which we work together across the country. And that's different from a lot of our competitors. And to me, that's been the most important part of our growth, is having leadership that are able to keep us growing, but at the same time have enough of that smaller firm feel. And all of us contribute to that every day, and every one of our partners is a leader in that regard in a different way. I was watching, I forget who it was the other day, talk about leadership and described it as you want people who don't want to be passengers in the car, they want to be driving the car. And it doesn't matter whether you've got a title or not, you want to be driving the car here at Venable. I think it's a very entrepreneurial place. So we can't afford to have a bunch of followers.
Do you have one story that stands out as sort of the epitome of that, or even more generally, your favorite Venable story?
I don't know that I have any favorite one, but there are lots of them, some of them not well known, where somebody at Venable has really needed something. And another Venable partner or partners has stepped up. Chuck, you probably know a lot of the same stories I do about people's children being sick, or our own lawyers being sick. And whether it's at Hopkins or Cedars-Sinai in LA or any of the big New York hospitals, somebody at Venable stepping in and making sure that people were getting the right care. I had some version of that happen to me twice in 1988. I was driving back from court in Bel Air, was just creamed by a big truck, jaws of life, flown to shock trauma, spent a week there. It was another month plus before I could come back to work. And being part of this community then just made it so much easier. I can remember little things, Susan Galvey's children making cookies for her to bring over to my house as I was recovering. And then 28 years later, our house burns down, similar thing, little things, guys in LA, Dan Hoffer, Mitch Aval, and Doug Emhoff send me ties because I have no clothes left. So they send me ties, which not too long after that were going out of fashion, but until the pandemic hit,
They just cleaned
it was
their
good to have
closet.
them. Probably. No, I saw the Barney's label,
Okay.
so they were good. So it's things like that. And you don't have to have been here for 40 years to have the benefit of that. The first time I needed it, I was 3 years in, but the benefits of being with the place for 40 years and the relationships you have and the goodwill you have built up with everyone and the sense of trust that you have in everyone. I just feel so fortunate not to have had to switch firms, not to feel like that very understandable feeling that people know you as this younger person, and in order to move up, maybe you need to move somewhere else. I hope people feel like they don't need to do that here. I certainly am glad I never had to.
Talking about young people, do you have any advice, that golden nugget that you'd like to share with young lawyers?
In addition to knowing everything you can about AI, it's something that we've all been talking about since the pandemic started, which is spend as much time with lawyers and other people as you can. Come into the office whenever you can. I just, even with coming in 3 days a week, I worry about something that was fundamental to our development, not just as lawyers, but as people, which is we had this whole other thing, and it was great to be able to go home at night, but everybody was leaving in the morning, kids going to school, we're going to work, and I worry about that changing and not having that other community of people to fall back on. I'm not sure where Severance, the television show, fits into all of that, but I really think it's important to have some of both, and important to have that work part of life.
Well, sound advice. I'm so grateful for your contributions to this firm and so proud to have been your partner for such a long time. Thank you for taking your time today and sharing some of your insights.
Thank you. Thanks for asking.